Winter fell softly over Willow Creek that night, laying its breath across rooftops and fields until everything seemed made of glass and memory. The lamps along the main road flickered like tired hearts, their light trembling over drifts of dirty snow. Officer Elias Rowan drove slowly through the emptiness, the hum of his patrol car mingling with the sigh of the wind. He was not meant to be working. Tonight was one of those restless evenings when sleep wouldn't come, and silence pressed too close to his ribs. His hands gripped the steering wheel like a prayer he wasn't sure reached anywhere anymore. At the edge of town, past the shuttered gas station and the leaning sign that still read, "Open 24 hours." Though it hadn't been for years, Elias saw movement. A man stumbled out from behind the pumps, his coat flapping like wet wings, a half-empty can in his hand. The smell hit first, gasoline, sharp and cruel against the cold air. Then Elias saw it. A German shepherd tied to a post, its fur matted with frost and fear. The man tilted the can, the silver stream catching what little light there was, and began to hum an off-key tune that sounded almost like a lullaby. Elias's breath stalled. He killed the headlights, stepping out into the cold. The snow crunched beneath his boots, a sound far too loud in that fragile silence. "Hey," he called, voice low, calm, the way he used to talk to jumpy suspects or frightened animals. The man didn't turn. He muttered something about devils, about dogs that remember too much, and stumbled forward again. The gasoline slick shone like oil on water, shimmering with the reflection of the man's shaking hands. "Put that down," Elias said, taking another step. The man's eyes found him then, bloodshot, unfocused, and filled with something far more dangerous than anger: shame. "It ain't yours," the drunk slurred, "not yours to keep alive." The words made no sense, yet the venom behind them was real. The man's foot slipped on the ice, the can fell, and the sharp clank seemed to shatter the air. Elias lunged forward, catching the man's wrist as he fumbled with a lighter. For a second they wrestled, shadows in a snow globe, until the lighter fell, its spark hissing against the wet ground. The man tore free and ran into the dark, leaving behind the acrid stench of fuel and fear. Elias let him go. He knelt by the trembling shepherd instead. The dog's ribs were visible beneath its fur, its breath quick and shallow. He spoke softly, the way he used to speak to his old partner, words meant to bridge the space between man and animal. The shepherd's eyes lifted to his, wary but familiar, and something inside Elias cracked. He reached for the collar, brushing away the grime. A tag hung loosely, its engraving nearly worn smooth by time. Only one word remained legible: Rexor. The name slammed into Elias's chest like a memory made flesh. For a moment he couldn't move. Snow fell heavier now, erasing the footprints, softening the world around them until it felt like the two of them were the last souls left alive. "Rexor," Elias whispered, his throat raw. The dog's ears twitched, his gaze sharpening for a fleeting second, as if recognizing the sound. It was impossible, Elias told himself. Rexor had vanished almost a year ago. A K9 unit lost during a shootout in the quarry. Everyone had assumed he died when the smoke cleared. Everyone but Elias, who still woke some nights to the echo of that single command he hadn't given soon enough. The town hadn't forgiven him. They'd whispered that he'd panicked, that his mistake had cost the department its best dog. The chief's voice had been cold when he said, "You did what you could." But Elias knew better. He'd failed, and that failure had followed him like a shadow that refused to thaw. Now here he was, staring at the same pair of amber eyes he'd seen in every dream since. The gasoline glistened on the snow between them, catching the faint orange of a match that still smoldered near the dog's paw. Elias ground it into the slush with his boot. Then, without thinking, he took off his coat and wrapped it around Rexor, feeling the trembling slow under his touch. "Easy," he murmured. "It's over." But the truth was, it wasn't. It had only begun again. He lifted the shepherd, surprised by how light he'd become, and carried him to the truck. The warmth inside fogged the windows immediately. The radio murmured static, a faint whisper of human voices somewhere far away. Elias looked at Rexor lying on the seat, eyes half-lidded, body limp from exhaustion. His hand hovered before resting gently on the dog's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of breath. Alive. Outside, the streetlights glowed dim through the falling snow, turning the world into a blurred painting of whites and grays. Elias drove carefully, one hand on the wheel, one on Rexor's fur, as though the contact alone could anchor both of them back to the present. The town passed by. Shuttered shops, a church steeple veiled in frost, a diner whose neon sign still blinked "Eat," in weary insistence. It was the same road he'd driven 1,000 times, but tonight it felt like a confession. By the time he reached his cabin on the outskirts, the storm had thickened. Snow fell sideways, and the wind howled through the trees like an old hymn. He parked by the porch, turned off the engine, and sat for a long moment before opening the door. The cold hit like a wall, but he didn't care. He carried Rexer inside, laying him near the fire. The room smelled of pine wood and old leather, of a life half-lived. The flames danced across the walls, touching the framed photos of another time. Him and Rexor, side by side, both younger, prouder. Elias knelt again, brushing the dog's fur clean with slow, deliberate movements. Beneath the dirt and frost, he could see the scars. Small, jagged lines along the shoulder and leg. Wounds that spoke of survival, not defeat. "You made it," he whispered. "All this time, you made it." The dog stirred, a soft whine escaping his throat. Elias smiled. Something fragile but real, breaking through the years of guilt. He found an old blanket, wrapped it around the shepherd, and sat beside him. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind softened to a sigh. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel hostile. It felt earned. Yet even in the calm, doubt crept in. The town would talk, of course. They always did. Maybe they'd say he'd lost his mind, bringing back a ghost. Maybe they'd say the dog wasn't really Rexor, just some stray that looked the part. But Elias knew. Recognition wasn't in the eyes or the scars. It was in the silence shared between them. He poured a small bowl of water, watched Rexor lift his head weakly to drink, and felt something inside him loosen. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the first tremor of it. The snow outside thickened again, covering the world in another layer of forgetting. Inside, the fire hummed low, steady, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. Hours passed that way. Elias dozed in the armchair, the sound of Rexor's breathing a lullaby against the crackle of the logs. Somewhere deep in his half-dream, he heard the echo of the past. Gunfire, shouts, the sound of paws racing through gravel. He stirred awake with a start, the taste of regret bitter on his tongue. The dog shifted, as if sensing the tremor in his thoughts, and placed one paw on Elias's boot. That simple gesture, quiet as snowfall, undid him more completely than any apology could. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the dog's side. The warmth there felt almost holy. "You came back," he whispered. It wasn't a question. It was a promise. Outside, dawn began to break, thin and fragile, spreading pale gold across the snowfields. The storm had ended, leaving the world clean and unmarked again. Elias rose, opened the door, and let the cold morning air in. It carried the faint scent of pine and smoke, the same scent that had lingered on Rexor's fur that night at the quarry. The memory returned, not as a wound this time, but as a reminder of what had survived. He turned back to the fire, to the figure curled beside it, and felt a strange peace settle over him. The guilt hadn't vanished. It never would, but something within it had shifted, softened. Maybe redemption didn't arrive with grand gestures or miracles. Maybe it came quietly, like a lost dog finding his way home. As he watched the flames dance against the window, Elias realized the night had not just returned his partner. It had returned his purpose. The man he used to be wasn't gone, only buried beneath the years of silence. And as the sun began to climb, melting the edges of the frost, he knew this was only the beginning of something he had long thought impossible. Forgiveness that walked on 4 legs and found its way back through the snow. The fire had burned low, its embers pulsing like the last beats of a tired heart. Morning came pale and uncertain, painting the frost on the windows in thin gold veins. Elias sat on the floor beside Rexor, rubbing the dog's ears as though afraid he might dissolve if touched too roughly. The shepherd's breathing had steadied through the night. Each rise and fall of his chest felt like a miracle too fragile to name. Outside, the world was wrapped in a hush that only winter could bring. The trees stood bowed under their white burdens, and the fields beyond the cabin stretched endless and empty. Elias rose stiffly, his knees aching from hours on the cold floor, and stirred the fire. Sparks leapt upward like tiny ghosts trying to escape. He made coffee, the scent of it curling through the air, mixing with the faint musk of wet fur and ash. For the first time in what felt like years, the cabin didn't feel haunted. It felt inhabited. Rexor tried to stand but winced, one paw trembling beneath him. Elias crouched, supporting his weight. "Easy," he murmured, his voice soft as breath. The dog licked his wrist, an old reflex, one that cut straight to the bone. Elias smiled, though it hurt to do so. "We'll fix you up, partner." Just like before. By midday, he bundled himself in his coat and walked into town. Willow Creek had the sort of silence that wasn't peaceful, but watchful. The kind that lived in doorways and followed footsteps. He stopped at the small supply store, the bell above the door jingling half-heartedly. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Kearns, raised her eyebrows when she saw him. "Heard you brought back a stray," she said. Her tone was polite but sharp-edged. "Funny thing, isn't it? Looks an awful lot like that police dog you lost." Elias didn't answer. He bought bandages, food, and medicine. When he handed over the money, Mrs. Kearns hesitated. "You be careful, Rowan. Folks still remember what happened at the quarry." Her words weren't cruel, just cautious. But they landed like stones. He nodded and left without looking back. Outside, snow had started again. Soft, aimless flakes that drifted down as if uncertain where to land. On his way to the truck, he noticed Clara Wynne across the street, locking the door of the veterinary clinic. She looked up and caught his gaze. No judgment in her eyes, only the quiet understanding of someone who'd carried her own ghosts. She crossed over, her boots crunching through the snow. "I heard about the dog," she said. "If it's who I think it is, he'll need antibiotics and rest. You still have that old stove for heat?" Her voice carried the warmth of someone who'd forgotten how to be afraid of kindness. He nodded. "He's hurt but alive." Clara smiled slightly. "Then so are you." Later that evening, as the wind clawed at the shutters, a soft knock came at Elias's door. When he opened it, Clara stood there with a small parcel. Medicine wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. She didn't come in. She only handed it to him. "You'll know what to do," she said. Her eyes lingered on the dog curled near the fire. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "Welcome home, Rexor." Then she turned and disappeared into the swirling snow. The days that followed moved slowly, like thawing ice. Elias cleaned Rexor's wounds, fed him by hand, and watched strength return in small increments. The flick of an ear, the lift of a head, the tentative wag of a tail. At night, he'd sit by the fire, the rhythmic sound of breathing filling the spaces where words could not go. Sometimes he imagined Clara's presence, her voice describing the world outside, in the way only people who've learned to listen can. Their connection grew in gestures, an extra loaf of bread left by his porch, a note tucked into a parcel that simply read, "Keep going." But Willow Creek had long memories, and whispers traveled faster than snowmelt. Some said the officer had gone mad, living out in the woods with a ghost. Others said the dog wasn't the same, that it was bad luck to keep a creature returned from the dead. Elias ignored them, though each rumor left a faint bruise across his resolve. One night, when the moon was a silver coin lost in clouds, Rexor lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Elias followed his gaze toward the window. Movement. A shadow swaying near the tree line. He went to the door, the cold immediately biting at his skin. A figure staggered forward and his stomach turned. It was Dale Murren, the drunk from the gas station. The man looked worse than before. His coat hung loose, his face hollowed by drink and something darker. "You took it," Dale rasped. "You took the devil from me." Elias kept his tone level. "Go home, Dale. There's nothing here for you." But the man shook his head violently. "That thing ain't right. You think you can keep it? It remembers things. It's got fire in its eyes." Rexor growled again, stepping closer to Elias. The snow fell between them, thick and slow, muffling everything but their breathing. "You need help," Elias said quietly. "You're cold, drunk, and talking nonsense." Dale laughed, a broken, wet sound. "You'll see. You'll see what it brings." Before Elias could reply, a flash of light caught his eye. Dale's hand, clutching a torch wrapped in rag and flame. The world narrowed to that single, trembling blaze reflected in the dog's eyes. "Don't," Elias warned, stepping forward, but Dale lurched, the torch swinging dangerously close to the porch. The smell of burning oil cut through the cold. "Please," Elias said, voice barely more than a whisper. "Put it down. This isn't the way." For a moment, Dale hesitated, the wind tugging at his sleeve, the firelight trembling in his gaze like doubt. Then Rexor barked, a sharp, echoing sound that sliced through the storm. It was the same bark Elias remembered from the quarry, the one that signaled danger before it arrived. The torch dropped. Flames licked up the wooden railing, hungry and fast. Elias lunged forward, knocking Dale aside, stamping out what he could. The fire caught the corner of the shed feeding on dry timber. The night turned fever-bright, orange against the white of snow. Rexor darted toward the blaze, barking wildly, as if trying to herd the danger itself away from his master. Elias shouted, but the wind swallowed his words. Clara appeared out of the dark, drawn by the glow. She ran to help, her coat billowing behind her like a shadow of light. Together they fought the flames, shoveling snow, choking the fire back until the worst of it hissed and died. When the smoke thinned, Dale was kneeling in the snow, sobbing into his hands. The torch had burned out between his knees. "I didn't mean to," he muttered. "It just keeps coming back." Elias looked at him, then at Rexor, standing despite his wounds, chest heaving, eyes steady. The sight struck something deep inside him. All those months he'd thought he was the one saving the dog, but maybe it had always been the other way around. "Go home, Dale," Elias said softly, "before the cold finishes what the fire started." Clara touched his arm, grounding him in the stillness that followed chaos. By the time the fire crew arrived from town, the danger had passed. They took Dale with them, muttering about madness and drink. Elias watched the red lights fade into the horizon, their reflections dancing in the half-frozen puddles like scattered stars. The night smelled of smoke and salt and something else. Peace, perhaps, if such a thing had a scent. In the silence that followed, Clara knelt beside Rexor, checking his bandages. "He's lucky," she said. Elias shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "We both are." She smiled faintly, and for a moment, the air between them felt like thawing snow. Quiet, hopeful, inevitable. Weeks later, winter began to loosen its hold. The snow retreated from the fields, leaving behind patches of green that shimmered beneath the weak sun. Willow Creek slowly forgot the fire, as small towns do, replacing tragedy with rumor with silence. But for Elias, the change lingered like a low hum. He walked the dirt roads with Rexor beside him, the dog's stride confident now, tail high. They passed through town often enough for people to see. The whispers quieted. Mrs. Kearns even smiled once when they met her by the post office. Clara visited sometimes, bringing supplies, pretending it was only business. They spoke little, but their silences had texture. Warm, deliberate, stitched with things not yet said. On one such evening she watched Elias scratch behind Rexor's ears and said, "He looks at you like he remembers every good thing you ever did." Elias nodded. "Maybe that's what dogs are for, remembering the good when we can't." As spring began to breathe through the last of the frost, Elias sat on the porch watching the sunset. Rexor lay at his feet, paws twitching in dream. The world was finally quiet, not from absence but from peace earned the hard way. The horizon glowed amber, the same color as Rexor's eyes when the firelight caught them. Elias thought of all that had burned and all that had survived, and he felt something settle in his chest. No longer guilt, not exactly forgiveness, but something steadier, a kind of grace. He leaned down and whispered, "You found your way home, old friend." The dog stirred, pressing his head against Elias's hand. "Maybe we both did." The narrator's voice would have ended there if not for the need to speak once more to whoever listened. To you, perhaps, the stranger who wandered into this quiet winter tale. Because stories like these are not about loss or even redemption. They're about the small mercies that arrive when we've stopped expecting them. The way light finds its way through the cracks, the way love returns in forms we almost missed. If you've ever stood in the cold, waiting for something to come back, know this. Sometimes it already has. It's just waiting for you to open the door. The wind stirred through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Inside, the fire hummed low, steady, eternal. And in that small cabin at the edge of Willow Creek, Grace slept beside a man who had finally learned to forgive himself. If this story found a corner of your heart, stay a while. There are more whispers to come. Subscribe to Whispered Tales, where every soul, no matter how lost, can find its way home.